Greetings, ladies and middlegents, and welcome to today's edition of RE346, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Eyes Open, written by MyNameMeansBentNose. She opened her eyes. A success, perhaps. The Cistian noble looked up at her with his handsome, slanted eyes, mouth curling with pressure. Patron Bitchel. Why was he here? She couldn't move. She seemed to be standing up. She took a step towards the disgruntled old reptile, but moved no closer. What? She took another step, to no avail. Kishu looked down at herself. Her short arms and legs shimmered oddly, her long body a little less so. She wore a traditional tabard, belt and dress with the green and gold colors typical of the noble staring at her with his orange eyes. She brought her thin tail around, but when she held the tip of the tail in her hands, she felt nothing. A success indeed. You'll be confused, of course, Patron Bitchel spoke. You are lucky we could save you. My son Brekshel will be pleased to see that you can speak. Kishore attempted to bend over to touch her snout to the floor in the required Cistian greeting of common born to noble blood. Attempted, but could not. She found herself restricted by a wall that she could not feel. Above her was a complex round apparatus that shimmered with light. Below her, the pedestal with a deep groove around the edge. She carefully looked and could see the crystal around her, the transparent cylinder set into the groove to hold her tight. But why? My distinguished lord, please, what has happened to me? Kishu could barely keep the quiver of fear from her tail and her voice. You died, of course. We have preserved your mind in the memoir crystal. Quite an expensive device. But white scales were always quite rare, Bishol said, adding a dismissive wave with the tip of his tail. I understand this can be a bit to take in, so I have awoken you early so that you may compose yourself before meeting my foolish son. His son? Brekshel. Just a day ago, that name would have sent her heart racing. But right now, it was barely even registered. Kishu might not have been able to bend over forwards, but she could fall to her knees. She could feel the stress hormones dyeing the scales behind her eyes black, and this time Kishu couldn't keep the emotion from her voice. I have died, my distinguished lord, but what of my parents and sibling clutch? Bitchel examined something on the pedestal underneath her and pricked his tail again. It is of no matter. Concern yourself only with meeting my son tomorrow. She opened her eyes. Patron Brekshel stood before her, playing with the mechanisms on her pedestal. A brightly colored wingless avian stood over him with his long arms clasped behind. And she has no remaining relatives? The avian asked. Oh no, she and her family were all slain in the bombing of Ventress when the burrows were flattened. Pure luck that she was retrieved, the only of my glitters that I could revive. There was a time Kishu would have been shocked and horrified to hear that, but she knew Patron Brekshel much better than her adolescent self. Even if she still appeared to be adolescent, even if she was no more than a glitter, a pretty trophy, her mind had long matured. Kishu almost spat the words that had long sat in her head. You always claimed ignorance of my family's fate. Kishu, it has been a few years, so I imagine. Yes, so, good news. I've sold you to my business partner, Thweet Sarish. How many fancy tales did he spin for you, Thweet? Kishu didn't bother restraining the acid in her voice. The bird didn't care. As you say, she has spark. I will take her. Of course, Brekshel would have her voice audible for a sale. He'd let her speak when she was still innocent, still a malleable display piece. Once she'd realized Brekshel only kept her as a decoration and status display, he'd been forced to mute her and her increasingly angry complaints. Good. I'll have the memoir crystal packaged for you in a hand's day. Not going to say goodbye, Brekshel. The green-scaled patron didn't even look as he turned off her memoir. She opened her eyes. The storage room was dark, but for the glow of her crystal and emergency light over the entrance door. The room was thick, with crates and varying sizes shrouded in darkness. Sweet Sarish stood in front of her with a foot off the floor while wringing his hands. His bright multicolored plumage had long failed. Now he was just a miserable 300-year-old merchant. Your better moods won't save you this time, Snapsnout. Thweet growled as he wrung his hands. Good for you, Rainbow Turd, Kishu replied, with all the haughty attitude that she could muster. Found someone as gullible as yourself. Thweet's feathers slicked down tight to his body with displeasure. Just because your childhood crush never cared for you is no reason to insult my customers. Kishu allowed herself to hiss with pleasure. There were truly many beings out there unwilling to tolerate a little rude behavior. Well, Thweet, you certainly treated me no better. And he hadn't. He'd left her as a public display piece in one of the busiest stations in one of the busiest sectors of the spiral arm. He had left her to watch literally millions of individuals live their free, happy lives. No matter, here it is now. Your new owner, Axel Chet. Thweet's hands were still rubbing. The being that walked through the door seemed like an insectoid with its hard brown exoskeleton, but Kishu could barely tell. It walked on 4 legs, evenly spread around its torso. The thing had 2 medium-sized arms and a long arm that extended from its backside like a tail. It stopped next to Thweet and stared at her with a single emotionless black orb. This one is Axel Chet of Research. She opened her eyes and checked her arms. She still looked like the alien, but with a white exoskeleton instead of a normal brown. Awake as, spoke the unfamiliar creature. She shifted her eye to get a proper look. At first, she thought she was looking at a Sistian. She looked much like her own people, but there were slight differences. Barred pupils, not slitted, a wide flat tail instead of a long whip tail, and most notably, he was an amphibian, made obvious by the cap and shoulder plates that dribbled moisture down his feathers. This is the crystal memoir, yes, Axel Chet replied. Name this. The newcomer was using a translator that didn't quite mesh with her memoir. She'd heard similar things a few times during her years with Thweet, but this seemed worse. Not known, Generation First Axel Chet did not record. What? Aren't you Axel Chet? Kishu asked, surprised enough to speak for the first time in a while. Axel Chet had always been more concerned with the memoir, but had resisted the urge to destroy hers. She had seen other memoirs dismantled while their residents were alive. No, the emotionless monster had instead used hers as a test. One of the many things he'd done was to change her body to match his. He'd even reprogrammed her to use the extra legs and arms as naturally as his own race. Axel Chet, 6 ancestor units removed. This one is Axel Chest. Interest, Will. The amphibian started checking at his bag hanging at his hip. But you look identical, Kishu whispered. 6 generations. Hive dissection, all identical. How long? By my estimates, 1,500 removed you are from your cycles. The amphibian was speaking through a wand with a circular receiver on the end. The wand translated what he was saying to something she could understand. Kishu looked at him with shock. 1,500? Yes. The Dexashin have already forwarded me the data technical of memory crystal yore. I am viewer's historian, and I'll be in possession taking you of priceless relic yore, Sistian gone, as you know. She opened her eyes. Surely form hers different before. Kishu slumped as she returned to existence. She didn't bother to look. She had heard thousands of useless conversations already. Expected, yes, preserve history valued was. Mammal shit, that's, but miserable looks. Viewers had long gone, but she'd given up long before. The old historian had seemed fun at first, bombarding her with endless questions about her old life and her time with the merchant Thwerp, something or the other. Language needed not, politeness had please. Forgive not, can. The viewers did not care to return the favor. He only wanted, only asked, only demanded. He was unwilling to grant anything in return, valuing the sanctity of her historical purity over her own well-being. He'd been absolutely mortified when he found out she didn't know her own people were gone. Viewers hadn't made that sort of mistake again. Neither had any of those who followed. Ask then must. Your terms I agree to. Conditions but. Condition? So Kishu had stopped speaking, only a bit at a time, but more and more as time passed. This made viewers and his successors more demanding and stubborn, not that she cared. They only stopped asking when she stopped speaking entirely. No, the new voice said with a deadly finality. She could barely see the silhouette of shoulders and head. Kishu didn't care to look. She'd long given up. She opened her eyes. Eyes. Kishu shifted, looked around for the first time in who knew how long. Her short arms were back, with her all three-fingered hands. Kishu raised her tail, but still couldn't feel it when she grabbed the tip of the appendage. "How is it? Kishu, right?"
What?
Kishu asked in surprise, looking at this unfamiliar new biped. A mammal, a primate, perhaps. It wore simple pants and a tucked-in shirt. Its flesh was pale and pink, and it had a well-groomed patch of brown hair on much of its head and some of its lower mandible. 2 more horizontal patches of fur sat above a pair of green-brown eyes. The corners of its mouth dropped as Kishu spoke. Kishu jumped, startled when it spoke, distracted as she was staring into its eyes. I thought I got all the old translators correct." It scratched its chin and turned away.
"No, wait, I understood," Kishu called out. "I'm just surprised. The wet-skin said that we were wiped out."
"Psst, wet-skin. Some names are The creature had bared its teeth for a moment, but all the life seemed to leave its body at the next breath. You knew?"
"The greatest dishonor of the historian viewer's life was letting slip to me that no living Sistians remained."
The mammal looked up into her eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt as if someone was seeing her. "Well, Kishu, I have you at something of a disadvantage, since your name is engraved on the control panel here."
"It is?
But they said forget that," the mammal interrupted, putting his hand as high in the glass as he could reach. "Let's start something new here." Kishu crouched to place a hand where he's rested. "So, Kishu, I am a male human in my prime, and my name is Miles." He bared his teeth, and the sides of his eyes wrinkled in the most unusual way. "And I would like us to be friends." Kishu felt stress hormones turning the scale patches behind her eyes black.
"I would like that too, Miles."
She opened her eyes and felt the gentle brush of moving air. A hand held hers for the first time in 2,000 years. She felt the warmth of another living being. "Can I tell you a secret, Kishu?" She looked at the man who saved her soul.
"Of course you can, Miles."
The feeling of sound resonating in her throat was one she'd never known she was missing. Kishu found herself drawn into his green-blue eyes once again. Miles smiled at her, his eyes wrinkling in that funny way that she liked. "Kishu sounds very much like kiss you in my native language." It was just like him to joke at that moment like this. "And as far as the name goes, it's gorgeous." Miles had only let his smile grow wider. "Want to see what Earth is like?"
"I can't think of anything I'd ever wanted more," Kishu replied.
Kishu sat up slowly, happily letting him help her sit up, then climbed down from the growth table. He held her hand as she wobbled on her feet, completely unfamiliar with a new flesh and blood body. Miles helped her from the room to the living room and then to the entrance. She held her breath as she reached out and pulled an ancient-style latch to open the door. The sun was so bright against her new eyes, Kishu couldn't help but squeeze her eyelids shut. And it was so warm. "Easy," Miles breathed, drawing her outside carefully despite the momentary blindness. Kishu followed slowly, carefully, enjoying the warmth of the sunlight upon her. And then she opened her eyes. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.